Meanwhile.
Well, a little video audio montage for you to get things rolling. Shout out to my guy Giuseppe, who does a really good job at stuff like that. So I just decided to juxtapose 2020 with 2024 and have a little bit of a different reality take on what's going on here. Now, at the end of the day, they're both connected, right? And I saw this comment from Christine in the comment section that it's all about divide and conquer. Absolutely 100% true. We know that this is the case. And, I covered this earlier this week over on 15 Minutes, where I talked about this whole idea of the quartering, which is symbolic of the two eclipses that took place in 2017 and 2024, which basically split the country into fours, right? And in 2017, that first eclipse came down from Oregon to Florida, basically split it in two. We saw sort of the subatomic manifestation of that, right? When everything just became very binary, red states, blue states, white versus black. straight versus gay, men versus women, and it was really kind of the Mason-Dixon line. It kind of mirrored the Mason-Dixon line. So that happened in 2017, and in 2024, we have the other eclipse that comes up from Mexico and all the way through the tip of Canada. And again, what does it do? It cuts the country into quarters. And so what we have now is we have the left-right divide in actually from 2017 on. And now we have the divide within the left and the right. So now the country has been ideologically quartered, and I think effectively so. So what's going on with the protests that are happening across the campuses? And what is the role that George Soros is playing? Who is George Soros anyway? We'll try to get to some of the answers around those questions. We'll do our best to get to the bottom of it. Excuse me, over the next hour or so. But if you're new here, welcome to the Friday FARcast. Most times I have a guest. Today, my guest is Chatario. And I'll be riffing with you guys off and on through the show, bringing your comments up here and just use them as a springboard so we can move the conversation forward. And other Fridays, I have guests. Last Friday, we had Lee Williams. And I want to just share with you that he raised $2,500 after he was on our show or on Friday. So everybody that helped out and threw a little in the direction of the farmers in West Texas, thank you for doing that. Much appreciated. And hopefully it'll buy some fence and buy some hay. And if you haven't helped out, you certainly still can. That show is still, it's not live, but it's in the on the page here on the channel, and feel free to check it out. And there is a link to Lee's website at the bottom of the comments where you can still donate and help out the farmers in West Texas, and also help out Lee's project, which is a documentary on the fires and the farmers called I'm Here Now. I'm Here Now, which is all about a neighbor helping another neighbor. So anyway, thank you for everybody who donated. We'll have our buddy Russ next week, who always has I would call Russ's footage the worst and the best, meaning that a lot of the footage are things you're not going to see on other channels. And in many cases, it's very hard to look at. And in that regard, it's the best because you're not going to see it anywhere else. And Russ is just an amazing source for, he's for a guy who is not on the front lines. It feels like he's on the front lines, even though he's many miles away. And we used to have reporters that were embedded, back in the old days in Vietnam. Even as a kid, I remember, and I was young, 7, 8 years old, 6, 7, 8 years old, watching the TV and, little black and white TV, and there'd be a reporter, really on the front lines. And I'd be like, my God, is that guy going to get shot or killed? It was really kind of a heavy, it was a heavy assignment, but we don't have that anymore now. So, we really have to rely on people who find clips that pass the sniff test and pass them along, because there's no representation any longer in any of the mainstream media. So anyway, Russ will be with us here next week, and we'll have more guests moving forward. I'm going to try and get Neil Kramer back on the show. Neil was a guest a long time ago, and he's a really intelligent guy, really intelligent, really articulate. I would say deeply spiritual, and also quite pragmatic in the same sentence, spiritual and pragmatic. So we're going to see if we get Neil back on and have a good conversation with him. Anyway, so I wanted to take a look at, by the way, before I get into everything, please hit the like button. Hit that like button. Smash the like. Smash it. That metal music got to me. Hit the like button. subscribe and hit notifications. That's always quite helpful. We're over 14K. It took me 14 years to get here, but we're over 14K. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate all you guys for showing up here, whether it's on a Astro Weather or Sunday Night Astro Live or a show like today. Your participation is always, always met with gratitude. Thank you. Below, you'll see a little banner here for our guy Chris at True Hemp Science. And you know the drill. But if you're new to the show, you got to check out truehempscience.com. And that's where you're going to find some of the best CBD products on the internet. And if you order $100 or more and just type in 15MINS, you will get a free goodie bag. And there are some cool things in your goodie bag. I guarantee you, you will not regret the goodie bag. $150 or more gets you free shipping, so you save a little bit more. And then there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you support Chris. You're also supporting the show, which is a good way to do that. I don't have any coffee links in there today. Oh, well, that's okay. Anyway, let's get back to the show at hand. Let's get rid of the banner. And let's just check in with you guys before I dive in. Yes, I'm up to speed now on the astrological tip. We have a new provider for processing payments for all you people who had philosophical and or economic issues with PayPal. We've moved on from PayPal. So if that's ever been a hang up for you, well, now you have no excuse to book a session with me. So there you go. Thanks, Tom, for putting that in there. All right, let's get into this. There's so much to unpack. Where do I start? It feels like a lot of this began when Elon Musk started to speak out against the ADL. That's where it feels like the genesis of a lot of what we're experiencing kicked off with. And of course, Elon had to go to one of the concentration camps with Ben Shapiro, by the way. He also had to pay a little visit to Israel and promise to help rebuild Gaza. But this all started when he got into a beef with Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL. And basically what Elon Musk's beef was that the ADL was preemptively and proactively going after Elon Musk's sponsors and accusing Elon Musk of being anti-Semitic. That's where I feel like the beginning of this story started. And the ADL has a history of doing things like this, right? They will target people if they believe that they are a threat to criticizing a certain country in the Middle East, or a threat when certain groups are criticized. And they will single them out, they will target them. And if they have any economic interests, they will reach out to those economic interests and those partners and basically tell them that person is toxic, they're poison, and you'd better stop doing business with them. Because if you don't stop doing business with them, you're complicit and you are just as bad as they are. Therefore, you will be on our list as well. And basically what it is, it's a shakedown scheme. And this has been going on for a very long time, right? It is a protection racket. And Musk objected to it. But even though he went out of his way to make amends, understand the other side of the story, so to speak, it didn't mean that was the end of what Elon Musk started. Like, that was just the catalyst in a lot of ways. Because if you go through Twitter, one of the things that Musk has done, and who knows, maybe it's all part of a honey trap. Who knows? One of the things that he's done is he's allowed people like E. Michael Jones, or Uber Boyo, or Asha Logos, or Keith Woods, and he even brought back Alex Jones, although Alex Jones is kind of on a leash. But he's allowed more of this discussion to take place, to the point where there are people who have left Twitter. I think, who was it? Jack White of the White Stripes. He got all up in arms about everything. Oh, I can't stay here. It's so hateful. There's this guy that I used to follow on Twitter who does Locked On Warriors, Cyrus Satsas. He's a nice guy. He's a dyed-in-the-wool California liberal. Now he's over on Threads because Twitter just got too mean, right? So there is a bit of a sea change that happened on Twitter. So a lot of this dialogue has been able to take place. Now, for how long, I don't know, right? And it feels like maybe in some ways it's also kind of a honey trap, right? Like they're able to just, kludge a lot of data from people. Oh, look at this person. Oh, look at this person. Oh, look at this person, right? And part of what's happened recently that's connected to that is this big spending bill that just got passed. Well, a lot of people don't know that the FISA part of the Patriot Act, not only did it get renewed, but they gave them even more powers to spy on Americans, meaning that they don't need a warrant anymore. They can do warrantless searches for everything. So if they wanted to warrantlessly search your cell phone or whatever, right, they can do it. And maybe before they had to bend the rules a little bit, right? They had to make a reasonable case that this person could be a reasonable threat. So therefore, we need to have every capability that's available to us to gather as much data about this person as possible. Well, that's still happening. But now they don't even have to make the pretext. That's gone. So while we're all looking at the spending, right, while we're all bitching about the money going to Ukraine and Israel, they basically renewed the FISA Act or FISA Act, whatever you want to call it, and then they put it on steroids. So it doesn't really matter, I suppose, whether you're on Twitter or not. But it feels like, Twitter is one of those things where it's like, oh, look at this person. Look what they're talking about. Well, they're a person of interest now. Why don't we go a little bit further and let's see what else we can gather informationally about that person. So I think this all really started with this sort of diffident act on Musk's part with the ADL, because what it did is it enabled, ennobled, and empowered other people who felt in a very similar way to start having very public discussions about this. Now, the ADL knows this, and so they have gone on a full court press. And the full court press is that anti-Semitism is, at an all-time high, right? It's at an all-time high. And there's an anti-Semite around every corner. It reminds me a lot of the Red Scare of the 1950s. And what they're doing now is they're creating a case, right? They're creating a case for this to be proven true. And the testing ground for the case is what's happening on the college campuses, right? So not only is anti-Semitism at an all-time high, but look at what's happening on college campuses. Now we have the proof. Now we have the numbers. Now we have the stories. Now we have the narrative to back up our claims. So when you look at the protests on the college campuses, and you have to ask yourself, well, what's going on there? Who's behind them, and why? Right? We'll answer those questions. But first of all, Steve brought this up yesterday on 15 Minutes. And this isn't anything new in terms of what's going on college campuses when it comes to Israel and Palestine. And I recounted the story of this woman that I briefly dated for a while in I think it might have been around 1987, and she was a little bit older than me. And so one day I was over at her apartment in Berkeley, and I saw some pictures of her. I don't know if they were in a photo album or they were like out in the living room, but I saw some pictures of her, and she was like dressed in hijab, and she was with all these Muslim people. I'm like, well, what's going on here? And she said, "Oh, well, that's back when I was going to Berkeley, and I was protesting against Israel and the Zionists for the Palestinian people." So this has been on college campuses. That must have been sometime in the early '80s. So it's not like they've just recently taken up the cause. It's been around for a while. And if you go back into the early 2010s, the whole what is it? Strike, the BDS movement, the vest, block was banned. It was I forget it was ban or block, the vest, and strike. Like the whole BDS movement was really heating up in the 2010s, and a lot of protests on college campuses were occurring, and some of them were actually successful. And what they were doing is that they were forcing the colleges to divest from funds that they had invested in that would somehow benefit Israel. So it was starting to hit Israel's pocketbook. And then Israel and the Israeli lobby and Israel money interests went into full swing. And so they would send people out onto college campuses. And there was this great video. I think it was put out by Al Jazeera. I'd like to find it one of these days. It was this great video. It was a long form video. And it was this woman who basically was trained in kind of counter agent provocateurism, where she was an agent provocateur, but that was really not her role. Like, so she was dispatched to, if I'm not mistaken, UC Davis in California. And her role was to embed herself in the campus, in the discussion, in the debate. And she was very successful at being this sort of counterinsurgency towards the BDS movement. And it was a fascinating video. And it was very Bernaysian in a lot of ways. And we know that Edward Bernays was he was the godfather of the psychological operation. And really, there were some tactics that she employed that were very Bernaysian. And so one of the things that started to pop up on the campus once she got there and got into the debates, and she was challenging, the kind of open forum that they would have with the provost and the dean and all the stuff, which they do on college campuses. And once she got there and started to challenge and organize, all of a sudden this anti-Semitic graffiti started to show up, right? So now there is sort of this prima facie evidence. Oh, look at this, right? Look at this. Now we have some evidence that not only are these people pro-Palestinian, but they're also anti-Semitic. And I was like, I watched. Now, the people who made the documentary didn't connect the dots. I connected the dots. They didn't connect the dots. But this woman was incredibly successful with her campaign to basically quash the protest. It was just one person. Now, clearly she had other people behind her, right? She had people working on the internet and posting on message boards and all, it was a very, very sophisticated operation. And it was just one person. So this goes back to the 2010s. It's not like it just became a fad overnight. Now, what started all this? Well, October 7th started the whole thing, right? That's what happened. That's where it all kicked off. And the BDS movement had been kind of dormant. It was still happening on college campuses, but it had been kind of dormant. And but it sure got kickstarted, right? It came to life. So we know that when there's a protest movement, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Antifa or even the current protest movement, there's probably a really good chance that there are people behind it that are aiding, abetting, and funding the protests. So one of the people that has been connected to BLM and Antifa and a whole host of other social and progressive movements is George Soros. And there are clearly some ties to the protests with Soros. So why don't we dive down that rabbit hole for a minute? And let's go through the Soros gate, right? Because it feels to me like there's a part of the movement, or there's a part of the protests that are happening that are organic. Like not everything is astroturfed. So there's a part of the protests that are organic. But what happens when they get going is that all of a sudden they go through this transgenic mutation and you have vested interests involved. So why don't we go into this? We'll go through the Soros portal here, and we'll look at how the money. We'll just look at the basic dynamics of Soros and Soros's participation, and it's the Open Society, the Tides Foundation, and the umbrella of all these NGOs and nonprofits, which it's a spider web, right? It's a complete spider web that, and whoever Soros is, like a lot of people have this idea of George Soros as being this avatar of evil incarnate, and all he wants to do is destroy the United States and destroy the West. And I've always felt like Soros is a bit of a Mandarin character. And if you're familiar with the Mandarin, he shows up in one of the Iron Man movies. He's played by Ben Kingsley. And he has these broadcasts that he does. And, he's incredibly evil. And he has these secret powers and technological prowess. And he's essentially blackmailing humanity. But when Iron Man / Tony Stark meets him, he's just a washed up actor and an old drunk, right? So he's a Mandarin. He's a Mandarin character. And while I'm not saying that George Soros is a washed up actor and an old drunk, I've often felt like he's merely a face, right? Who's behind the face? Who is behind Soros? That question has not been fully addressed or answered, because part of the Soros myth was at one time he gamed the English silver market, right? Like it was a margin. It was basically a margin call, and there was a manipulation of the silver market, and Soros threw all this money that silver would not meet its set price, right? And he won this infamous margin call, and he wound up accruing hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know the exact figure, but it was huge. So supposedly that was the bankroll moment for George Soros. And of course, there's the famous 60 Minutes interview where he's going through Poland and he's talking about what he did as a kid and how he sold out the other Jews to the Nazis. And he basically said, well, if I don't have any guilt, because if I didn't do it, somebody else will. Right. So that's also part of the Soros mythology. But outside of that, what do we really know about him? And how has he been able to continue to bankroll all of these candidates, bankroll not just federal candidates, but local candidates, right? Like, where does the money come from? Is he just an incredibly wise investor, and that huge amount of money that he scored when he gained the silver market in England? Has he invested that wisely? And is he getting triple interest on it so he can continue to manipulate people through huge sums of money? Or is he a gateway for other people to bring money through? And I don't have, again, any evidence whatsoever that links Soros to what's happening in Ukraine, but he did fund the Maidan Revolution, just like he funded a lot of these color revolutions, or at least the foundation, or the Mandarin, the character. Like that's where the money was coming from. And we know that he was involved initially with Ukraine, but is there money coming back from Ukraine? I mean, there are billions and billions of dollars that are going to it. And we know that Sam Bankman fraud essentially was setting up a channel for the money to flow back through FTX. How much of that went to Soros and the Open Society and the Tides Foundation? Like these are questions that, people don't really ask, but he has to continue to fund his operation moving forward. So I always felt like he was a bit of a bag man. You know what I mean? I always felt like he was, and if he was really, really problematic, he wouldn't exist. That's just the nature of the beast. If somebody's problematic, you're erased. And supposedly George Soros lives in this country with his son, Alex. Or is it Massachusetts or Delaware or Connecticut or someplace on the Eastern Seaboard? If he was really problematic, he wouldn't exist. So he's allowed to do what he does, whoever he is, whatever he is. I really feel like he's more of a bag man than anything else. He's set up a channel to funnel laundered money to move through. In any case, let's go through this. This is on Zero Hedge. The protests, which began at Columbia University, have expanded nationwide with copycat tent cities erected at colleges, including Harvard, Yale, Berkeley in California, the Ohio State University, and Emory in Georgia, with organized branches of the Soros-funded Students for Justice in Palestine having organized them. So we know that there's a Soros connection there. So we got another interesting character, Edward Snowden. Biden has sparked a wildfire. So these are the schools where the protests have started, right? And these are, I guess, other protests. So they're mostly on college campuses. I haven't seen any of these protests take place on the streets of state capitals or American cities yet. So this is from Afshini Emrani. I don't know who this person is, but he's a doctor. And he's saying here, something odd about those campus tent encampments. Almost all the tents are identical, same design, same size, same fresh out of the box appearance, which suggests that rather an organic process whereby students would bring a variety of individual tents, someone, or we go to the tweet. I think we know where he's going with it. Someone or something. Where are we here? Someone or some organization has supplied them and organized the event. I think it would be instructive if we can determine who that someone is, because rather than spontaneous demonstrations, these are choreographed by hidden actors, and the students, sincere though they may be, are merely manipulated props. And I would agree with that. I think there are students who firmly and fervently believe in what's taking place, and they see the injustice, and they see the carnage that is happening. And we've seen it on the show, numerous examples. And I've brought up the flower massacre, which Russ brought to the table, and hardly anybody has heard of it or seen it, right? Or the chefs, who were clearly taken out, right? And these young people are more than likely more than aware of those events and those situations. But when you're really emotional and you're passionate and somebody wants to help you and sponsor you, it becomes very easy to be manipulated. And now all of a sudden the group has some capital to continue to do what they're doing and, theoretically create better organization. And the next thing you know, you have an astroturfed protest movement that is not only large numbers, but well organized and well funded. So let's go back to the Zero Hedge article and go a little bit deeper again. The parent organization of SJP has been funded by a constellation of nonprofits, which all lead to Soros. At 3 colleges, the protests are being encouraged by paid radicals who are fellows of a Soros-funded group called the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, USCPR. USCPR provides up to $7,800 for its community-based fellows and between $2,800 and $33,600 for its campus-based fellows in return for spending 8 hours a week organizing campaigns led by Palestinian organizations. They are trained to rise up to revolution. The radical group received at least $300,000 from Soros's Open Society foundations since 2017 and also took in $355,000 from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund since 2019, New York Post. The group has 3 fellows which have helped propel the protests into a nationwide phenomenon, which you can read more about here. We're sure if the protests get violent, prosecutors will take appropriate action. Yes. So what's happening is these are the Soros-linked progressive prosecutors and current, newly elected, defeated, removed, removal in progress. So there are 70. And if you look at where the protests are, they seem to be also linked to the Soros progressive prosecutors, which means that they'll get out very quickly. That who knows? Maybe they will have a fund waiting there for their cash bail and they're back on the streets, right? So it's kind of a 2-pronged approach. We'll set you up, we'll organize, and we'll make sure that if something happens to you, you won't rot in jail. So there's the money for that. And there's the money for it on the prosecutor side because they've been put in place. Now, this is just one of the examples of the quote unquote Soros linked and funded prosecutors. They're able to do a whole lot more than just spring people out on bail very quickly. That's another show. So here we go. I wish I was more educated. A video captured at New York University shows that some of the students protesting there have no idea why. I've never seen this video. I've heard of this video. Let's go ahead and play it, and we'll see how easily manipulated people are, even if they're well-meaning and emotional.
And what would you say is the main goal with tonight's protest?
I think the goal is just showing our support for Palestine and demanding that NYU stops. I honestly don't know all of what NYU is doing.
Is there something that NYU is doing?
I really don't know. I'm pretty sure they're... Do you know what NYU is doing? About what? About Israel. Why are we protesting here?
Palestine will be free!
I wish I was more educated. I'm not either.
Oh.
I came from Columbia. I was there up at Columbia, and we came down. They said NYU students needed our support, so I came down.
So she's got the ubiquitous nose ring, which is, I'm sorry, I've insulted people with nose rings before. And you can wear anything you want on your body, including a nose ring. You can wear a cock ring. You can wear a butt plug. You can wear anything you want. You're free to do that. Me, personally, my take on it is it reminds me of the rings that they put through the nose of cows. This is just me. It's just me. This is how I see it, right? And cows are easily led around. Why? Because you just got to stick something through the ring in their nose and pull them along. And I don't know, maybe somebody with a nose ring can enlighten me. And I'm being really serious about this. I'm not being snide. Is there some pleasure that the nose ring brings? Is it like do you wear it because it helps you breathe? Again, I'm not being snide or satirical. Or is it a statement and it's an aesthetic statement and you believe that you look better as a result of it? I grew up in California in the whole kind of sort of postmodern neo-pagan techno-tribalism was really big in California. And it was like the front lines of body modification. And that's where a lot of this, I think, comes from. And who knows, maybe it's just a way for people to reconnect with something that's more primal, more tribal. I don't know. It's not something that I would want to do, but who knows? Maybe I'm missing out on something incredible. So if you have a nose ring, you want to leave a comment, I'll go through there and check. But it would be helpful if she knew what NYU was doing, right? Like if there was a fund that NYU was involved with, and that fund was helping Israel in some ways for whatever, munitions. I don't know, maybe NYU invests in Home Depot. Maybe they got a big amount of money invested in Home Depot. And Home Depot is clearly, that's Bernie Marcus's company, right? Bernie Marcus owns Home Depot, and Home Depot has a very strong relationship with Israel. So maybe it's simply just investing in Home Depot, but it would help. It would help to know that. Be glad, be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists. I've never murdered anyone in my life, and I hope to keep it that way. This is a top leader of Columbia's encampment with whom the school is negotiating, expanding his thoughts about how Israel, where we go again, we're back on X, how Israel does not deserve to live. Shall we listen to him? Here, let's listen to him, see what he has to say. It almost feels like when you see somebody like this, he almost feels like a cartoon character. Like, is this guy, and I'm assuming he's a guy, he feels a bit like a guy, but is this guy for real? Is this what passes for leadership? So when I see this, of course, what am I going to do? I'm going to look at the protest movement and say, well, it's ridiculous. And it has no gravitas. It has no moral weight. So then what's the natural reaction? The natural reaction is to side with the other side. And a lot of these people are Gen Z. And they are downstream from the protests of 2020, which I believe were mostly millennials. So this is an entirely different group of people that are protesting. Now, that doesn't mean that some millennials may not show up and, join in solidarity, but this is a different group. And Gen Z tends to be more like, from an astrological perspective, their rulership, and this is what happens with generations. The rulership of the generation exists in the three outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. And Gen Z is ruled by Pluto and Sagittarius. So they tend to be more philosophical than, that's not to say that millennials aren't philosophical, but they tend to be more philosophical than millennials, right? They tend to be more engaged in things that are international because of Sagittarius, like a protest against Israel would fit in because of the Sagittarian nature around, like it's out there, right? Sagittarius is out there. Also, Israel falls under the religious category as well, although they're not protesting against religious Jews, but they're protesting against Zionist nationalist Israel, which is a religion of the state. And that's another part of Sagittarius, that it's religious. Now, Gen Z is broken up into basically two groups. There's a group that shows up right around 1996, and we go, 7 years, 2003, right? That's when Uranus is in the sign of Aquarius. So that first wave, Gen Z, from 99 to 2003, are going to be much more Aquarian in some ways, right? Because they have Uranus in Aquarius, they have Neptune in Aquarius. In late 2003, 2004, Uranus moves into Pisces, which is very different. And he feels to me like a Uranus and Pisces guy, right? He's probably around 20, maybe 21 at the most. It could be wrong, but that's what he feels like. And I think with Uranus and Pisces, you'll get a certain amount of confusion, right? You'll get a certain amount of confusion, and you'll also get kind of like Pisces is really weird in this Uranian expression, because I do feel like there'll be some degree of like zealotry. Like Pisces can be really emotional and can really ride those waves of emotion. And what you'll see early on with that first wave of Gen Z is the sextile between Uranus and Pluto. So the outer planets are bolted together in a way where they work better together. And the sort of the expression of that first wave is, I think, clearer and more focused in a lot of ways. Whereas the second wave, Gen Z, you'll see Uranus and Pisces begin to square Pluto and Sag. So that's a whole different discussion than like the first wave. So when you get into that Uranus-Pluto square, they tend to be a bit more volatile and a bit more run by their emotions, or run by the emotional high that the ideology, whatever ideology they're embracing, comes along with it. Pluto in Sagittarius is very ideological. You know, that's a trait that they have. They're ideological, and give Sagittarius a good ideology, a good system to latch onto for a while, and they're all about it, right? So we have to break this down, even in terms of subgenerations. So I think when you see these people, they're going to be more easily led. Because if you look at that first wave of Gen Z, right, they're like 28, 29 years old. They're creeping up on 30. So if you were born in 1996, you're in your Saturn return now, and you're not on a campus, right? And we could even go up to 2000. You're 24 and you've probably graduated, right? So we're seeing some smattering of that first wave, but a lot of second wave Gen Z, and they're just different. Yeah, they're Gen Z, but they're different. And Uranus is the vehicle of protest, right? It's the planet of revolution. So in Pisces, it's just going to look different. And there's going to be confused people, right? But it almost feels like, and I don't think he's a plant. Like, he's not a plant, But it also feels like he's been put in a position because he is ideological and easily manipulated. Like somebody had to say, okay, you're in charge here. Now, whether it was his peers or whether it was somebody who was a faculty advisor, right? It's like, this is not a guy that you want to be the face of your movement. And so when you look at him, you don't take him seriously. And so what do you do? Well, you just turn your back and you go, well, the other people, they must be the ones that are right because this guy's a motherfucking fool. And I can't take him seriously. So even this feels like a bit of a setup. Like, what if he was able to represent the issues at hand in a credible way? Right? Like, what if he was kind of an Americanized black version of Keith Woods? Now, all of a sudden, you're like, whoa, this motherfucker's saying something. Maybe I should pay attention. When you pay attention to this, you want to look the other way. So again, is it performative? Is it AstroTurf? Like, who put him in charge? And why? Who knows? Maybe it was his peers. And if it's his peers, it's like, people, you need a better faculty advisor. Okay, so let's go back to let's go back here to my bad. Where are we? Stop sharing. Hold on. Let me get back to Zero Hedge. Let's keep drilling down here. So there he is. There's the Mandarin. And this is the sort of the bulk of the story. So there's money behind it. The places where the protests have started also coincidentally match the areas where Soros funded judges can catch and release. And then we see sort of the face of the movement or the movements, and they're not very impressive. Again, what does it do? It automatically puts you in the other direction, right? Because we live mostly in a binary world. Unless, of course, we're talking about gender. That's a whole different discussion. But we live in a binary world. And you're either with the protesters or not. You're either with Israel or you're not. You're either with the terrorists or you're not. Sound familiar? So if we continue to sort of chip away at all of this, right? Now we have the pretext for what Jonathan Greenblatt and many other people like Ben Shapiro have been pounding the desk for quite a while. And that is the rise of anti-Semitism. So now all of a sudden, what do you have? Well, you got all these protests happening on campuses all across the country. There's your anti-Semitism. It's right. See, this is exactly what we're talking about. And it's on the rise. Well, when you AstroTurf these protests, it happens pretty quickly. Right? It happens pretty quick. And so when you look at this guy, again, can you take them seriously? Can't. But does that mean that you can take the other people who are pointing the fingers at them as being anti-Semites and pro-Hamas? Can you take those people seriously? Because that's what they're hoping that you do. They're hoping you take them seriously. And this idea that anti-Semitism is on the rise, well, look at what we're talking about here. Not me, but them. Just add water and stir, right? Or just add to water and stir. So we had Mike Johnson at Columbia, and he was sent out there. He was dispatched to tell the crowd in no uncertain terms that what they're doing is hateful and it's anti-American. That the founding fathers in their graves, the founding fathers looking down from them from the 12th dimension of heaven are shaking their heads. They would never do something like this. A lot of the founding fathers were fucking scoundrels. I'm sorry. When you look at the Boston Tea Party and you look at, Samuel Adams and Paul Revere and these characters, right? What did they do? They dressed up like Native Americans. They couldn't even be their own people. They dressed up like Native Americans, and then they paddled out to the ships, and then they dumped all the tea, right? Because just in case they got caught, you could blame it on those nasty Indians, right? It's like, come on. A lot of the founding fathers were kind of scoundrels. And there's even some debate about who fired the first shot at Concord. There's some very good evidence that it was more than likely the colonialists, right? So to sit there and, quote chapter and verse on the founding fathers and, the sanctity of everything that they did, the blood that was spilled for freedom, and that you're desecrating it, Mike, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. It's bullshit. Everybody had a stake in the game at the start of the so-called country. They had a stake in the game. Yes, was it private property and ownership? Of course. Or were we the recipients of it downstream? Yes. But at the end of the day, they were also buttering their own bread. Let's just be real about it. So he was dispatched, and he was a fool. He was an absolute fool. And are we good here? Let me see. What is this? Okay. He was an absolute fool. So the archetype that I've been using for Mike Johnson lately is that he's an errand boy. He's an errand boy. He's an errand boy that's sent by grocery clerks to collect the bill. So after he gave his performance at Congress to hammer that bill across the line, he was dispatched to Columbia. He's a puppet man. He's a man on a string. Okay, Mike, go do that. You know what to do. Show us your loyalty. Show us your loyalty, Mike. One of the least effective speeches I've seen. Mike Johnson's one of these guys. You can tell that he's kind of in love with his voice. Like he knows that. So I'd love to see his human design chart because I think his throat is connected. I think he's got a motor in his throat, right? Because he has the ability to sound really articulate and serious and kind of has this voice of the people. But he knows that. And he knows that he can tap into that. Like that's one of his secret powers or his superpowers. But it only works when you have authenticity and conviction. That's the only time it works. And you can see when he is giving his little speech at Columbia that he's trying to tap into that authenticity and conviction because he knows that that's where the power of his speech comes from. But when he can't tap into it, when he is, really reaching and kind of swinging for the fences, it sounds fucking ridiculous. Right? It's kind of like, do you remember when Ted Knight played Ted on Mary Tyler Moore? And he had that voice, or he had that newscaster's voice. But Ted was a potato head. right? And he could have the voice as much as he wanted to. But the things that came out of his mouth were fucking stupid. Right? In a weird way, I kind of feel sorry for Ted as a character. I understand where they were coming from. Like, he was just a suit and tie and a mouthpiece for the news. He wasn't an intellectual heavyweight like Murray. Murray was an intellectual heavyweight. And he wasn't grizzled and cynical and bombastic like Lou. And that's kind of what made Ted lovable in his own way, right? But that's what Mike Johnson sounds like. He sounds like Ted on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, where he just has this voice and he's bloviating. But the difference is that Ted doesn't know that he's bloviating. Mike Johnson knows, because you can just see it. Let me see if I can cue this up, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I don't want to do the whole speech because I want to keep my appetite for lunch. Let's do 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Let's see if we can pinpoint where Mike Johnson is reaching. He's reaching for the authority and the conviction. And he's reaching. All right, let me do this. Oh. All right. My tabs keep moving. All right, let's see if we can wring it out of 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
The founders and the great leaders who had come through this institution in the past believed in religious liberty. They believed in democracy. They believed in morality and virtue and the dignity of every human person. They believed in the free exchange of ideas, and they detested mob rule. We are standing here right now on the steps of the Low Library. In this very building right behind us, Columbia University once awarded Winston Churchill an honorary degree, and it was Churchill who said, "It is manifestly right that Jews should have a national home where they may be reunited." We believe in that principle. And today I'm here to proclaim to all those who gnash their teeth and demand to wipe the state of Israel off the map and attack our innocent Jewish students this simple truth: neither Israel nor these Jewish students on this campus will ever stand alone. Today, Hamas issued an endorsement statement of the protesters on this campus.
Okay, so right there, you can see right here, right? What is he doing here? Right here, he's reaching down, right? He's trying to find the authority and the conviction. You know, it's kind of like how when a pitcher winds up in baseball, yeah, he's looking at his notes, but he's trying to find the authority and the conviction because he knows that this guy has been speaking for a long time. And he's spoken in front of churches and fucking Rotary clubs, whatever, right? And when he hits the right notes for the right audience with authority and conviction, there's a response. And the response will come from them as part of a kind of a biopsychic feedback loop, right? And so he realizes, like, oh, yeah, this is my voice connected to these words in a way where these people have heard it and it's resonant. So I know what that feels like. And what he's trying to do here, and in situations like that, that can be really easy, right? You're kind of, you know, you're playing for the crowd. He's not playing for the crowd here. He's not at the Rotary Club. You know, he's not at some church somewhere in Louisiana. That's playing for the crowd. That's easy. He's having to find the authority and the conviction to tap into in the way that he's done in other places to sell it to this group. And this is exactly what he's doing here. And look at his mouth, His mouth is kind of twisted, right? The guy is almost in some degree of pain here. He's reaching down, he's reaching inside so that he can deliver the next sentence with authority, conviction, and power.
Today, Hamas issued an endorsement statement of the protesters on this campus. They called them the future leaders of America. It is detestable. All of this has to be said because the cherished traditions of this university are being overtaken right now by radical and extreme ideologies. They place a target on the backs of Jewish students in the United States and here on this campus. A growing number of students have chanted.
But do you see how he's running out of fuel? He's not getting, I wonder if like he's a projector in human design, because he's not getting the feedback, like the biofeedback loop from the crowd. And his speech is running out of gas. Let's keep going.
Support of terrorists. They have chased down Jewish students. They have mocked them and reviled them. They have shouted racial epithets. They have screamed at those who bear the Star of David. Enjoy your free speech. They've told Jewish students who wear the Star of David to leave the country. And shamefully, some professors and faculty have joined the mobs. Things have gotten so out of control that the schools canceled in-person classes, and now they've come up with this hybrid model where they will discriminate against Jewish students. They're not allowed to come to class anymore.
He's really out to sea without a paddle right now. Right? He's trying to make this case that is not only is he out to sea without a paddle, like he's taking on water. But he's being forced to go out here and do this by the people who have helped him get elected.
For fear of their lives, and it's detestable. As Colombia has allowed these lawless agitators and radicals to take over, the virus of anti-Semitism has spread across other campuses. By some counts, as many as 200 universities have a similar form of protest right now.
So what's interesting is that he equates this with like the protests are this is exactly what I was talking about. That they have turned the protest movement into an anti-Semitic movement. And they have been massaging the definition and the contextualization of what anti-Semitic means. So if you are anti-Zionist, which by the way, has nothing to do with being Semitic. Zionism is a political ideology. It's like being anti-democrat or anti-Marxist or anti-Republican or anti-conservative. That's what it is. So if you are anti any of those things, but particularly anti-Zionism, now it's connected with being anti-Semitic. If you are anti-Israel, which is a country, it's a country, you are now anti-Semitic. You could be anti-Colombian, not anti-Colombia, or you can be anti-Venezuelan or anti-China, and you're not going to get in the same hot water. But now if you're openly criticizing a country, well, now you're that particular country, you're anti-Semitic. So what they've done really over the course of the last, I don't know, since whenever Elon Musk took on the ADL and Jonathan Greenblatt, they've redefined the definition of the word to be more inclusive of other definitions of what the word would be, right? So I just wanted to point out Johnson and how he's really just an errand boy. And I also wanted to point out how much of a failure he was in that moment. And he has this supreme confidence. You can just tell He has this supreme confidence in his ability to speak because he's got a good speaking voice. And you can tell that he's taken debate, and you can tell that he's hit those marks and he's moved people. He knows this, right? He has some self-awareness of himself as a speaker. He's Speaker of the House. He's an empty suit, but here he is lacking. He's lacking the gravitas. He's lacking the moral authority. And guess what? He knows it. He absolutely knows it. You know who went to Columbia? Barack Obama went to Columbia. He went to Columbia. Where is Barack Obama? And it's amazing, right? Like, there's so much chatter and crosstalk in the media. I mean, from Daily Joe to who the hell do I know, right? Like, everybody is talking about this shit. Morning Joe, whatever his name is. The great one, Mark Levine, right? How many of them have invoked the name of Barack Obama for Columbia? I haven't heard it. It's like, Barack, didn't you go to Columbia? I think I smoked a couple J's there, but let's not get into that. Let's not get into my residency at the College of Columbia University. Now, if we're happening in the Ivy League, well, I guess Columbia is an Ivy League. So where did he go? Did he go Harvard Review? I always forget whether it's Harvard or Yale. But what's the other school? I'd be there. Just don't ask me about Columbia. Supposedly the guy went to Columbia. Wouldn't he be somebody that the kids would listen to? He's not there. He's a no-show. So what is going on, right? It's more divide and conquer, which is what Christine talked about. It's also the verification and the validation, theoretically, that anti-Semitism is on the rise. They created a theater. They created a theater to validate their position. Because if you don't really drill down and look at it, if you were just somebody who consumes what they give you, you would say yes. Absolutely. The other thing is that, again, if we go back and look at 2020, and there's a lot of scar tissue left over from 2020. And people, and nothing happened, right? That's one of the reasons why I played the video at the beginning of the show, because nothing happened. Nothing. What did they do? It was, at the end, it was like, well, let's have a fucking kumbaya moment, right? In the meantime, we're going to burn America down. We're going to tear the statues down. And in most cases, the police will just take a knee. That's all they'll do. They'll just take a knee. They're not taking any knees now, are they? It reminds me of the scene from Platoon, right? There's a scene from Platoon where they go into this village and they put Manny on watch. And they go through the village and, looking around, and they're trying to see if there's, any North Vietnamese there. Like, what can they find, right? It's a typical kind of scouting mission. And then they keep asking, where's Manny? Where's Manny? Where's Manny? And then they go down to the river where they left Manny. And Manny was there to kind of watch over things. And Manny has been essentially tied to a tree and has been gored, and Manny's end was not a good one, right? So then what happens? Well, you get Barnes, played by Tom Berenger, and Barnes takes him back into the village, and he becomes the avenging angel. And they go through this village, and they torch the village, and people are killed. And that's what sets up the conflict between Elias and Barnes. Elias played by Willem Dafoe. By the way, Tom Berenger as Barnes, one of the greatest characters of all fucking time. And I remember the first time I watched the movie, I really identified with Elias, right? Elias is almost this religious figure in a lot of ways. Like, how could he be so enlightened in the midst of war? And Barnes is hardened, right? He's just hardened by war. But as I grew older, I appreciated Barnes a lot more, right? Like, there was something about Barnes that was real. And that's not to say that Elias wasn't real, but it was different. Like, I came to appreciate how Barnes grafted onto the situation. And there was no cognitive dissonance between Barnes and his mission. Whereas with Elias, there was a little. You know, Elias was all about war with honor, right? Barnes was like, this is fucking war. And the only honor is, you know, winning and getting out of here alive. That's it. That's all that matters. So Barnes leads him back into the village and basically, you know, shoots it up and burns it down. It feels to me like what's happening on college campuses now is the Barnes moment. You know, and people are, you know, they're sick and tired. They're sick and tired of what happened in 2020, and nobody did a damn thing about it, right? They're sick and tired of it. They're sick and tired of young people getting on TikTok and talking about how unfair it is that they have to work 45, 50 hours a week and then come home and have no life. They're sick and tired of it all. They're sick and tired of it. And they look at what's happening in the college campuses and they say, good. Teach those ne'er-do-wells a lesson. It's about time. It's about time it happened. There's no free lunches. And I just go back to this Uranus and Pisces thing that a lot of these Gen Z kids have. And Pisces is sacrificial. Like, it's a sacrificial energy. And they become the sacrificial lambs of the Iranian protest movement, which is really what's taking place, right? And it is, I would say, a bad time to protest. It's a bad time to protest because there's so much scar tissue and negative energy that has accrued since 2020. And now these guys, well, we'll call them the Sentry class, SENTRY, the Sentry class. They've been given carte blanche. Go, do, remove, tase, whatever. You have my permission. Who's mine? Well, it's the governor of the state or the mayor of the city. And why do they get the permission now, but they didn't get it in 2020? It's because of the donor class. The donor class of 2020 told them, hands off. Hands off, bros. Hands off. You don't want to agitate this any further. Take a knee, bring him some water. Invite him home. Let him bang your wife. Just don't do anything violent to them. Don't restrain them. Just let it happen. Surrender. Bend over and surrender. That was 2020. Now it's a different story because the donor class has different marching orders, literally different marching orders. And I try to look at this from an objective place and not get twisted up inside because of the so-called injustice. But I have to say that it pisses me off. It pisses me off that we had to sit there and watch that in 2020. And nobody did a goddamn thing about it. And they tore down our statues. They tore down our traditions. They were forcing people to fucking take a knee, right? They were looting. And by the way, the looting hasn't stopped. The looting has just become kind of standard operating procedure. But it got kickstarted in 2020. And it wasn't just Walgreens or Target. Mom and pop shops were looted and burned to the ground, and they didn't do a damn thing, right? And it was this country, our country. And these protests are about another country, not this country, another country. And now all of a sudden, it's open season. Take him down, tase him, throw him in jail, do whatever you want. So the rhetorical question here at the end of the day is, what country matters more? And I'm trying not to be inflammatory. I'm just asking a question, because on the surface, it clearly seems like one country means a lot more than the other country. That there is an urgency to defend one country while there is a clear lack of urgency to defend the other country. And if you're not aware of this glaring juxtaposition, well, you better take the scales off of your eyes. And again, I'll try to be fair. It could be any country. Let's say, for instance, it was China. And these were Chinese students, right? And they were protesting against, I don't know. If it was China, they'd probably let them. But let's say that we're protesting against China, right? Now, do you think the Chinese would come in and say, you got to shut this shit down? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. But if they did shut it down, then could we not have the same discussion about China? Right? What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to put this in a neutral category. Generic country A and generic country B. And we're generic country B, and this is generic country A. And it certainly seems like generic country A has a lot more action when it comes to defending generic country A's principles, reputation, and standing. Whereas generic country B was getting a kick in the nuts in 2020. And I'd like to see somebody like Mike Johnson sit down and answer some very difficult questions regarding this topic. If you're going to defend generic country A to the teeth, which is what's happening, theoretically, I don't have a problem with that, as long as you defend generic country B with the same amount of teeth. Because at least it would equal itself out. Right? At least it would equal. Well, we won't stand for this here, and we won't stand for this here. Okay, fine. You've made a unilateral, universal decision. But that's not what happened. And now they're conflating it, and it's becoming, oh, well, here's another protest movement. Remember those assholes in 2020 when they burned the fucking country down? Let's remember when we had to sit back and take a fucking knee, pass out water? Well, guess what? It's a different day now. They let the dogs loose. Clearly they have. Don't think that there isn't some pent-up animus on the side of the law enforcement. because there is, right? They're like, hallelujah. This is what we've been waiting for. Feeding time, right? Because they had a muzzle. They had a muzzle on them in 2020. So is this going to continue to exist and go on? Well, why wouldn't it? You know, chaos is something that is chaos is a political tool. And it's used by anybody. You could just take the energy and you can move people with it. You can move issues with it, right? Chaos is one of the greatest political tools of all time. If you have too much chaos happening for too long of a period of time, then it dissipates and it becomes useless. But yeah, they could run this out all summer long. It could get really hot, right? We could have lockdowns, martial law, because we're just scratching the surface here. What if all of a sudden you have other groups that join in? Now, one of the things that we saw in that brief clip that I played, wasn't brief, is guess how long that video is? It's 9 minutes and 11 seconds. I didn't plan it that way. There were people at Emory University who are black, and they were fucking roughed up. There's a clip of a guy who's getting tased over and over again. Now, this could be problematic. Not for me or you, maybe potentially because of the chaos. But what happens if all of a sudden this footage from Emory goes viral and it takes on a bit of a George Floyd kind of effect? Now all of a sudden you've got BLM back in the mix. Now all of a sudden you've got Antifa back in the mix. And it could happen. But at this point in time, it's not just BLM and Antifa, because there are also conservatives who, like, one of the biggest trends taking place right now is Black MAGA. There is a Black MAGA trend. Now, whether or not Black MAGA is in Israel's back pocket, like Daddy MAGA, that's a whole other discussion. But there are X factors and there are variables. But I think what they would try to do is they would try to stack the violence, whether it would be an organic response or something that's astroturfed, right? What they want is they want more. They want more. And astrologically, we got Mars and Aries coming up. Hell, it's been volatile enough with Mercury and Aries and the retrograde kind of going back to 2020, that 2020 period. 2020, Mars was in Aries for a really long time. And it retrograded in Taurus and went back into Aries. And so, when we had the George Floyd riots, Mars was in Aries. So we're coming back again to Mars and Aries. So this would be the second Mars and Aries cycle since then, because Mars returns are every 2 years, right? And just go back to 2020 when Mars was in Aries. It was hot. America was on fire. Here we go. Mars and Aries comes back again. So could they, basically throw gasoline on the fire? The answer to that is clearly yes. And could it get to this point where they have lockdowns or shutdowns or, and again, can it bleed into the election? And the other question is, how is this going to affect Biden and the Democrats? Because when you go into college campuses, these are Democratic issues. Palestine has been classically a neoliberal Democratic issue forever. Nobody on the right really cared about it. But on the left, on the neoliberal left, they cared about it. And how is this going to impact Biden and the Democratic Party? Remember, we're into the quartering, which we talked about earlier. And the quartering's on the right as well. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nicole Boebert, Thomas Massey, Chip Roy. They've like peeled off from inside of their own party because they don't agree with what's happening with their own party. You're going to see that on the left as well. Although the left seem to stick together no matter what. They just keep their mouth shut and they stick together. They usually don't step out and say, hey, this is wrong. They usually just keep their fucking mouth shut. What was I going to say about that? There was something I wanted to say. Anyway, it'll come back to me. But that's going to be an interesting thing to monitor as we move through this. And I think it's just getting cranked up. And at the end of the day, right, it is ultimately evil because we are being turned against one another. To me, this is the most salient point out of all of it. We're being turned against one another. And that to me is strategic. That to me is the devil in the details. And let's just sit back and watch them. Let's just sit back and watch them turn on each other and beat each other up and eat each other up. And let's have a good laugh at what we've let loose and how it will destroy their country, their society, their culture, right? This really feels like the moment, right? Where it almost feels like it's a scene out of one of the Christopher Nolan Batman movies where the city turns on itself, right? And it's like the Ouroboros and begins to devour itself. It's not good. It's not good. So what would be the best course of action here? Look, I am all in favor of the students being able to protest. I am. I'm in favor of it. Just because they're protesting against something that a certain group or groups of people find offensive or they don't like, tough shit. Tough shit. Right? They can protest against anything. They could protest against the war in Ukraine, but they don't. They could protest against, I don't know, the border, but they don't. But if they did, I wouldn't stop them. Or if they wanted to, they could protest for fucking trans rights for all I care. It's part of our story. Like, you can protest. You can protest. You could protest against the banning of wood stoves if you wanted to. They would never do that, but you could. And when you take that away, you take away a fundamental, I'm not even going to call it a right, a fundamental capacity of being human. And that is the right to say no. And to say no en masse, or to say no with others who say no. It's a fundamental human expression. When you take it away, it's bad news. And it's clearly bad news in this country that theoretically is supposed to honor a piece of paper, which clearly has absolutely zero meaning at this point. So I'm in favor of it. Protest. I don't care. It's your parents dying. That said, it might be better to stop protesting. It might be better to just shut it down and not give them the opportunity to tear us apart. And look, a lot of these protests have been, from what I've seen, have been mild compared to 2020. They're fucking dancing and they're doing yarn dances and they're doing yoga and they're burning incense and they're giving speeches. I mean, they're not harming anyone physically. They're harming people with their ideas and their speech, theoretically harming. And there are stories where, Mike Johnson is talking about how somebody had their eye put out. Who the fuck knows? I don't know. That guy is an inveterate liar. So you can't believe anything that comes out of his mouth, like most politicians. But if I were them, I would say, okay, we're good. We're good. Just shut it down. Because then they wouldn't have anything to punch against. They being the century class who was there on behalf of the donor class. They can't hit a target that's not there. And there would be other forms of protest if you wanted to. You just have to get creative about it. But it feels like it's going to continue to happen. And even if they weren't there, they would probably concoct some group and send them out there just to make sure that it looks like somebody's out there protesting. The irony and the paradox of the world that we're living in is going to become incredibly clear to people. And when it does, that's really the moment of truth. What are people going to do about it? How are people going to respond? Because everything no matter what the spin is, no matter what the programming is, the truth is going to come out. It will come out. Even if it is manufactured and put out there at the highest decibel possible. I'm not talking about the truth. I'm talking about these events. It still won't be big enough and loud enough to drown out the truth. It'll come through because that's what's happening now. And people are getting wise. They're getting wise. They're like, fuck, we're waking up here. We're seeing what's going on. And this is also one of the reasons why this is happening, because we're hitting the Rubicon of awakening. And the closer we get to the Rubicon of awakening, the more dangerous it becomes, because the tentacles of power don't want to let go. And so the clutching of the power gets tighter. The grip becomes more intense. And this is where we are. There's no turning back now, right? We just can't pop the blue pill and go back to the way it was. The only way through is through. That's it. That's it. And hopefully, by the grace of God and the Most High, we're able to get through this with the highest degree of spiritual protection that we have. And I guess when you're armed with the sword of truth, it doesn't get much greater. I think we'll probably get to find that out. We'll probably have to road test that at some point. All right, let me see what you guys are talking about inside a chat. Without being taken out for William, I'm going to put this up here. William, I'm sure there will be casualties of truth. I'm a realist. There will probably be casualties of truth. And that's just how these things work sometimes. But it's bigger and larger than any one individual. I have done Israel. I did it last week, and they have Uranus on their sun, and it's going to disrupt their plans. What does Christine have to say? Christine always has good comments. I still don't see anyone waking up. I disagree with you. I disagree. And the reason I disagree with you is because I'm on Twitter a lot more than you are. At least I think I am. And it was really weird. There's somebody I follow on Twitter named Molly Galt, who is got a good Twitter feed. She's fearless, right? And there was this guy who was on there on this one, I guess it was it was about UT. And apparently he's got a daughter that goes to UT. And he said, maybe we should go down there. And this guy, I think he's African, but he lives in the United States. Maybe we should go down there with guns and start and protest and back him up. And I said, well, you can't really bring a gun on a campus in Texas, because there was this guy named Charles Whitman who was a tower. He got a rifle and started shooting from a tower at UT. And they're very sensitive about people bringing guns on the campus, even though the state of Texas has open carry. So you really can't do that. But I understood where he's coming from. And then he and this woman got into a very heated debate. And he was like, this guy was hardcore. He was like pro-violence. And he's like, the only justice and the only freedom comes at the barrel of a gun. And to be honest with you, he's not entirely wrong. Okay. This woman who probably wanted the same thing as this guy was anti-violence, right? And anti-hate and anti-anger, which to me was really kind of the bicameral discussion, which was, male versus female. Men want action. Women generally want feelings, right? I mean, I know I'm kind of overgeneralizing, but it's kind of how it works. But by the time that discussion had kind of wound up, meaning like I'm done with this thread, they had basically come to an agreement. And they had very different positions. And I watched them kind of communicate and navigate to a point where they were on the same side. They were always on the same side, but their action and their rhetoric was quite different. And she realized that he just wanted to protect his daughter, right? And then he realized that she essentially wanted the same thing as he did. And to me, that's waking up. Like, they were already in some degree of awakening, but when they were able to come together and find some basis of agreement in their very disparate ways of solving the issue, I thought, this is an interesting conversation. And it fucking happened on Twitter. Do you know how hard it is to have a conversation on Twitter where you have disparate positions and then find a place in the middle to meet? It's really fucking hard. But I watched them do it. And to me, that's a form of awakening. And I watched Jason Whitlock when I became aware of Jason Whitlock in, I think, around 2004, 2003. And when I first started to read Jason Whitlock, I think he was on ESPN or I forget where, I didn't like him. And at that time, he was taking sort of the standard operational procedure position on all things black, right? And over time, I have watched him wake up. And granted, this was in 2003, and here we are, 2024. He's a different person. His perspective is different. His worldview is different. So I think people are waking up. I think they are. And some of it, I think a lot of it also has to do with your set and setting. And I say that because of my mother. And my mother was somebody who was, I would call her a conservative. And in California, she had a muzzle. She had a muzzle around her because most of her friends were liberal. Her church was liberal. She came to Texas, and boy, all of a sudden that muzzle was off. And she was very, she was feeling very comfortable. She was getting comfortable in Texas. And to me, that also represents a level of awakening, right? Because it was a being becoming aware of itself in a situation where the environment allowed that being to become aware of itself. So I feel like as more people become attuned to the situation, and there are varying degrees of awakening and recognition, other people then bounce off of that, or they're part of that feedback loop and they become aware of themselves as well. And it's like a different dimension of the individual emerges. And that's what I saw with her. And I think that that's inherently possible for all of us. So my final thoughts on the whole subject of awakening is to leave a crack in the door. Leave a crack in the door. Leave a light on somewhere for somebody that can see it or can crawl through it. And then if you have this idea that nobody's awakening, then, well, guess what? Nobody will awaken, right? Leave a crack in the door. Leave the light on. Let's see how that works. Let's see. Thor says, I enjoy exposing fools to themselves. You know what? It's a recreational activity that can be very, very satisfying. The rabbit hole is very deep. I look back and see many people stuck on ledges in the rabbit hole. You got to give them some space, right? People will, again, I just bring up my mother. You know, I saw my mother really emerge when she came to a place where she could emerge. It was almost like she was being, well, shoot, Christine, you met her, right? She was being, what's the word I'm looking for? It was almost like she was being saturated, you know, like a sponge from within. So I would say, at the very least, allow them to be where they are and leave a crack in the door for more. My cat just woke himself up snoring. See, Ryan's cat is even waking up. Look at that. That's a sign. This cat fucking woke up. There you go. I like Whitlock, but he's still combating against people that can be his allies. I understand that. I wish he hadn't gotten into a beef with Royce, but Royce can be fucking annoying sometimes. I totally understand why Jason asked him a simple fucking question. And Royce went off on one of his grand paradigm tangents and wouldn't ask the question. But I agree with you. Although I do like him going after Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders would never be an ally with Jason. Just saying. Let's see. What else? I leave breadcrumbs, but I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you. We all have our own methodologies, don't we? Yes, the cat awakening. We embraced her. You guys loved her. That weekend, man, that was fucking amazing, that weekend for her. She was so alive that weekend. It was great. You guys were awesome with her. Steve, you were really great with her. All right. Looks like we're running out of gas here. All right, let's move on. Thanks for being here. Letro's leaving. If Letro leaves, I'm going to leave too. All right. Take good care, everybody. Thanks for being here. And you know the drill. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to stay up on what's possible. Hit the like, subscribe, ring the bell. We'll be back on Sunday night. Take care. Much love to all. Bye for now. Can we get Elsa back on? Sure. We'll bring her back on. She's a good guest. Ciao.